Hello.
Hey, sorry about that.
Hello. Hello.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
I can. I'm admitting Jerry and Bree, Lori and Patrick. Is that you?
That's me. I'm Molly. Yes, it says Molly.
Cool. Let me just figure out. Sorry, I had a business meeting that ran up until the time.
No problem.
Caitlin.
Hi. I just had a fantastic whiskey with a guy who wants to make racket in Spanish. So that's why I'm 6 minutes behind schedule and not.
Oh, I like that.
I mean, that's
sober, if I'm honest.
how do I, where am I?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey there, how's it going?
Black people saving U.S. tennis.
I don't know.
That house.
Can you see me?
No.
I can't see you, and I don't think anyone can see me.
No, I can't see you either, Jerry.
Great. I don't know anything about any of this.
I'm going to send you both a prompt that says ask to start video, which hopefully means you can
Okay.
start the video.
Yep.
Oh, there's Jerry.
Voila.
Ah, there we go.
Voila.
Hello.
Look at that. We figured it all out.
See everybody's faces. There's someone in here
So,
reading called Lori. Is
so
Lori
I gotta
here?
get my T-shirt in here.
Yes.
I'm wearing the exclusive grass court season line from
Great.
Racquet
Wimbledon
Magazine.
approved.
Good for 4 weeks every summer.
Exactly. Grass season is really more of a construct in our minds. I just got invited to play the member guest at the Longwood Country Club, which takes place in
Ooh.
Boston, which is a city I tend to boycott on religious grounds, but I might consider playing.
You got a problem with Irish
The
Catholics?
first tennis was played in the United, well, they were in Newport, but after that was played at I think was the Longwood Cricket Club.
Yeah, I think it's.
I'm sure my, great grandfather thought about somewhere in Italy,
Totally.
That's why he wanted to get to America, so he
Did they
could
let
see that
Italians into the Longwood Cricket Club?
somebody had to clean up.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure between Boston has its own sort of outside of the South, it's one of the few places that I'm like, oh, okay. Sorry, Bree. I don't mean to disparage the South. Are you joining us from Charleston?
I actually live in Columbia, so
Columbia.
About 2 hours north.
I adore Columbia.
Columbia.
I have played a number of tournaments there. The Pepsi Open was in Columbia every year when I was
Oh.
here. And a good friend of ours has an amazing barbecue restaurant there called Warmouth.
Yeah,
Have you
it's
been?
very popular, but I've never been.
Apparently it's very good, but I don't know. There are some folks waiting to get in, but I'm not going to allow them in, assuming that this is our core group and I can sort of push them live in a minute. Is that okay with you, Patrick?
Yeah, I literally don't know anything about the technology side of this.
Well,
So whatever works.
I'm not super far ahead of you, but if anybody wants to. So,
Nice to meet you all.
Nice
for
to meet you.
starters. Yeah.
Nice to meet you as well.
You guys all, did you have any questions about the format? It's pretty straightforward, but we just usually open with a reading and end with Q&A. That's how it goes.
All right, I'm going to
Open with a reading.
Yes. Do you want to do a reading?
I think it's going to chase people away. I think my own feeling is just let's gab. But
Okay.
I hadn't picked anything out.
Well,
all right.
I mean, to be fair, Jerry, Patrick did say a 5-minute reading. So
He did?
maybe
I didn't get the memo.
So it's not, well, the only reason I bring it up is I don't think that length will alienate people, but maybe it makes sense. Forgive me, Patrick, for kind of being bossy. I have one whiskey in me, but I think maybe it would make sense for us to kind of talk a little bit and then we can kind of throw to you. So you do get a chance to read a little bit. Not that you
All right,
have
I got to think about what that would be, but okay.
No, no pressure. I think we can all probably have a very invigorating conversation about the state of
Actually, if you want to do a very short reading, I highlighted page 173.
Okay.
Just
Thank
the
you
part,
for that.
just the part about her. It's strictly, there's more of an on-court thing, which I think would be kind of cool because I love that paragraph about causing stress. So I don't know if you just wanted, we'll do that first, just a short.
I also, before I let anybody else into our confab, Briana, you have to write for us. So when is it going to happen?
Wow, you're putting me on the spot here.
I got you on the spot, so I'm gonna just make my ask and say, anytime, the door is always open. And I remember Ben pitched us something on behalf of you, and I was like, yes, do it. And then that was it.
Yes.
So just a reminder, the door is always open. No pressure now, but we'd love to.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'll have to find some creative juices in this brain and get something for you guys.
Nothing strikes me as you will be able to do that. Patrick, have you sent out like a text or a tweet saying we're live? No,
No, I'll do that right now. Sorry.
I can do that too. No, just to sort of say like, hey, just a reminder for folks to get on. And then, like I said, there's a few folks waiting in the waiting room where I can let them in. I'm not sure how to let them in, and only let them do limited things. I apologize. I guess mute all upon entry. I could do that. Ooh, I can mute them. How about
Yes,
that?
good. I think this is, yeah, the only difference was, I guess, when Greenlight does the registration thing, it's automatically muted, but I don't actually know that. So
Well,
if we could mute them, that would be
help you
good.
much with the tech side of things. Apologies about that, but I'm glad you guys figured it out. I'm just gonna very quickly, before I make everyone live, move my lamp so everyone can appreciate the Time magazine cover I stole from the promo closet. And put a light on it because it's gonna get pretty dark in here in a minute.
All right, I have just sent this out.
Maybe I'll try to read something from that's Wimbledon-y since we're in a almost Wimbledon-y moment. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Can you guys see Bjorn?
Yes, we can see Bjorn.
Kind of.
Why can I not find, what is your, Briana, what is your Twitter handle again?
For the tennis.
For the tennis. Your name is not in there. There we go. For the tennis. Okay.
Should I make us live here?
Damn it, where the hell is the Zoom link?
I will share it with you now. Should I put it in the chat here, Patrick? Is that easy for you?
Yeah.
Just email it.
You know what? I'm just going to retweet this one right here.
Okay.
Yes.
Anybody wants
And
to look
am I able to put something in the? What the hell is it? See, I'm really technical.
Yep, I can tell. You're about as technical as Dave is. I have to do all of the internet stuff. He was like, can you send one of those in calendar things where people get like a G count invite? That is what you're looking for? He's never worked in an office really, so it's.
Neither have I. All right, I just tweeted out another one. And one, I don't even know how to make this smaller. Exit full screen. I want to put the link to buy the book right here. That's important.
All right, I'm gonna make us live. Is that cool?
Yep.
Awesome. There's only a few folks waiting, but it's gonna reach a fever pitch after I tweet it out. Right after this, I'm gonna hop over to Metrograph and watch Players starring Ally McGraw. So I have a real busy evening.
That place is fantastic.
I know, isn't it?
Put that series together. I did an interview for the French.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, that was great.
Well, the movie is one of a kind. So
The movie's absolutely fantastic, and just for the time capsule element of it alone, like access. I'm pretty sure they got access like that afterwards, because I'm sure they realized seeing Yannick know his butt for 5 minutes a stretch was probably not something all athletes wanted to subject themselves to, but just the microcosm of the time and all these people and how intimate everything is. It's such an experience. I just kept taking screen grabs,
No, super.
With all the style. Right. Players is not as highbrow. It's pretty.
I remember Players. I'm old enough to remember Players.
Well, it was lucky because we had Joel Drucker's really well written story in our 15th issue about the Van Patten brothers and how they took Hollywood by storm. And I didn't realize that Players was written for Vince Van Patten and his recently broken up with but still cordial girlfriend Farrah Fawcett. And then they recast it.
Wow.
But can you imagine? It was originally going to be kind of a different film.
So awesome.
Yeah.
This is the first one I've done in this summer shade, but this is very strange looking.
You look like you're
I like it.
Amalfi Coast or something.
And we have our usual Squawkin Sports.
Nice too.
Yeah. So what, I don't know, should we give a couple more minutes or?
I think we should just jump in there.
Okay.
The thing about I think is, everybody has some thoughts about her. And what I like so much about this book is they allow room for everybody's thoughts, but they're also there's so much reporting and so much thoughtful insight that you can't help but come to this conversation with some sort of, you can't help but come with some ideas, but leave with maybe other ideas, which is what I am so excited to talk to you all about.
All right, I can do the intro. So welcome, whoever is joining us. This is the first Squawkin Sports Racquet Magazine confab. I usually host this with Dave Roth, who you might know from Defector and Deadspin and being the Donald Trump whisperer. But today we have special guests. My co-host is Caitlin Thompson, who is the co-founder of Racquet Magazine. She is co-host of the Racquet podcast with four-time Grand Slam doubles winner Renee Stubbs, a former D1 player at University of Missouri, and a columnist at Eurosport, which finds her often going head-to-head with the lamestream American tennis media, taking on tennis.com. We have Briana Foust, a tennis blogger who is launching a new podcast with Alan McDuffie called One Additional Challenge. There's not a date yet, but if you go to the Google and put in One Additional Challenge, you can sign up for the email, as I did. And she is the creator and keeper of the hashtag Black People Saving US Tennis, which is certainly true on the non-penis having side of the draw. That is neither a black nor white thing. There's just apparently no saving men's tennis whatsoever. And our featured author is Gerald Marzorati, whose new book, Seeing Serena, is right here. It's a chronicle of the trailblazing tennis champion and cultural icon, Serena Williams, during her turbulent 2019 tour season. And so pretty fascinating tour de force. It's kind of a higher wire act of writing that we will get into. He frequently covers tennis for the New Yorker, and he wrote a memoir about getting into the sports later in life called Late to the Ball. And are you going to you want to start with a little reading?
Yeah, sure. I thought I'd start, since we're 4 days from the championships at Wimbledon. I would start with a little riff I had on the 2019, which is when I was there, women's final, which, I'll read about it. Pete Sampras, slowing and struggling and contemplating retirement at age 31 in the summer of 2002, brought back his old coach, Paul Annacone, before the start of the US Open. Stunning much of the tennis world, Sampras, seeded 17th, won it, defeating Andre Agassi in the final and retiring shortly thereafter. Anacone, who'd later coached Roger Federer, among others, has a theory about how a tennis great ages. I'll quote him. I always felt that, and I still feel that, you can't take away greatness. In other words, you're not all of a sudden not great anymore. But what happens, I've seen, is that you can't sustain it for long periods of time. Not all aspects of a great player's game diminish at the same pace, nor do the inevitables of greatness, the self-belief, the hunger to win, winning under pressure, to find yet a next gear, all that stuff. These things don't wane steadily and irrevocably like fast twitch muscle fibers. Greatness, Anacone suggests, comes with time to flicker. It can flare in late career, but will never again glow every week. And don't count on finding some switch for it in the moment that nothing short of greatness is required to win. Serena Williams faced Romania's Simona Halep in the Wimbledon ladies final on an overcast Saturday afternoon before a crowd roaring for her as she came out on court, and if they'd read the odds makers, the English do, fairly assured she would win. In the 10 matches Williams and Halep had played previously against each other, Williams had won 9 of them, most recently at the Australian Open. Williams was an all-time great grass court player. Before reaching this final, Halep had never gotten further at the championships than a quarterfinal. Having begun the year as world number 1, she'd seen her rankings drop to number 8 after losing in the quarterfinals of the French Open, which she'd won the year before. To reach the Wimbledon final, she defeated only one seeded player. It might have been Naomi Osaka standing across the net from Williams or Karolina Pliskova, but it was Halep. Here on paper, anyway, was the opportunity Williams had been waiting for since her return to tennis after giving birth to her daughter, the chance to win her record-tying 24th Grand Slam title and her first as a mother. Major finals are not played on paper. Approaching her 38th birthday, Williams never summoned a flicker of greatness in a lopsided 6-2, 6-2 loss to Halep. The pace of Williams' first serve was not what it had been in previous matches, and she had only 2 aces. Her return, particularly on the backhand side, was not punishing, and neither, for the most part, were her ground strokes. Williams often starts slowly, but slowly doesn't do justice to how she started this match. Williams was down love 4 in the first 11 minutes. That this wasn't going to be Serena's day was all but certain by then.
Thank you. As we get to Wimbledon, where Serena will once again go for the record, although we'll establish right at the top, she already has the record.
Correct.
We don't need to go
Yes.
into the Margaret. We don't need to give Margaret Court any run here. I want to start just by asking, for those of you who are watching who have not read the book, it follows, you followed her physically. I mean, you physically went and followed her for a year, not without any special access. You talked to her in the press room. And yet this is not, I wouldn't call this a on tour book, because it really is, as I said, a tour de force. It's got a little bit of memoir about you, but it's not a book about your fandom. It's not it's got history, but it's not a history. It's not a biography. It's all of these things. There are, you interview Chrissy Everett, and it's mostly about how the clay courts play. And I was just curious, when you came up with the conceit for the book, was the idea to take in all these different styles of writing, these different things? Did you have a plan, or was it, I'm just going to go out and see what I come back with? And this year, that really was formidable because I feel like we've almost focused a little too much on her not winning, the championship, but actually getting to those finals is as amazing as anything that's ever happened. So
yeah,
just what was the approach from the outset? What was your plan, et cetera?
Well, it's a little of each. It was, I did have an idea that by following her for a season, I would have an opportunity to use that as my clothesline. I would have an opportunity to hang lots of other stuff on there, right? I mean, one of the it was a book, it became a book, but it started as an essay by John Updike about watching Ted Williams' last game that he played at Fenway Park, and using that as an opportunity to talk not only about Ted Williams, but about how about the people who either liked or didn't like Ted Williams thought about him. And that was kind of an inspiration. Could I, he was looking at one game. Could I play that out over an entire year? And there was ways I thought, okay, this isn't an authorized biography. I wouldn't want to write that book. And B, if Serena does write that book again, and I think she will, she's not gonna say, "Where's Jerry Marzorati?" to be my as told to person. So it wasn't going to be that kind of a book. But access to me at this point with athletes, even when you have access, it's a little Bull Durham-y, right? I mean, you're going to get like one anecdote that hasn't been told before, and then you're going to get boilerplate. So I wanted to look at her through a kind of, using tools of cultural criticism and reportage and that sort of thing to be able to talk about her as a tennis player and a culture icon, I guess. And the season was going to be give it enough narrative thread. And I didn't know how it was going to end, right? I mean, if she had won, it would have probably been a slightly different book, right? So if she'd won one more.
Briana, you described it as an analytical walk down memory lane, which I thought was an apt description. I wonder what, just expand on that, how it was reading it for you, in that some of this is very recent memory, obviously, but it's been a long time. We've been watching Serena for a long time.
Right. I thought Jerry did a great job of weaving through all of Serena's history in the span of basically like 1 or 2 seasons. Because, like you're saying, Serena and Venus have been on tour for over 30 years now almost. And so there's so much to cover, and they've changed so much over the years. So it was great to just see all the different parts that Jerry picked out, like the different anecdotes about Richard and some of the things Rich Meche, he would say about how Richard brought up the girls and how he had kind of like a new school mentality on how he didn't want them to be burnt out, and he would try and take them to Disney World and all these things we used to criticize them for not being focused on tennis, but it's really like how we want an athlete to be raised nowadays.
And as somebody who consumes way more tennis media than I, Caitlin, how did this land for you, just in terms of like other biographies read, other tennis books, other what was different, what because you liked it quite a bit, you told me, and I'm just curious what about it, other than it's a fascinating subject, but
100%. I mean, I think Brie really hits on something, which is, they've been playing for such a long time, and I think the ways in which we've understood both Serena and Venus as really sort of precursors, Serena in particular, of like sort of celebrity as athlete as celebrity. Only now really do we have a lot of context and understanding about how badly they were treated by the press, how much foresight somebody like Richard Williams had to essentially make them each other's allies. When they came out of the tour, the context, I think a lot of us who have watched the tennis space or been in the tennis space for a long time was their unorthodoxy, to say nothing of their sort of very openly racist and misogynist treatment at the hands of a very white and very old and very male media establishment, was, to sort of point out their differences. They didn't play all these tournaments. They didn't play juniors in USTA. They weren't really exposed to a lot of the players. Richard was treated, and if you go back and read, I think it was an Esquire or GQ piece about Richard Williams in 1996 or 7, when they were very, very young. One of the main takeaways I had was like the magazine feature writer was essentially writing about this man as he could be. If he was right about them, it was by accident. And they were quick to emphasize how he had delusions of grandeur, and alongside Serena and Venus being number one, he also thought he was as good a singer as Michael Jackson. And they went into basically a lot of painstaking sort of analysis of what he was about, instead of just a caring father who happened to be like a pretty decent tennis coach and knew what he knew and knew what he didn't know and got them to where they are. So, I think what I loved about Jerry's book, and I know Jerry, so I know he'll take this in the right way. Like, a man who's a boomer, who's a white guy writing about Serena Williams in this day and age is a tough task. And I admire him for taking it on. And I think he acquits himself extremely well, not only with his as expected thoughtful writing and really keen analysis and insights, but also accounting for the political moment in which we're reevaluating Serena especially, and to sort of say like, okay, this is somebody who we really didn't have the words and certainly the political context to understand. And maybe still don't, but there's a lot in here that I thought was just fantastic and really clarified a lot of things that I had long thought but not been able to articulate about her. And maybe the most important one, and the one that I want to talk about personally a little bit, is the idea of athlete as celebrity, because tennis had celebrities before. Chris Evert famously, with all of her endorsements, and Lipton and the tennis bracelet, and Alessi and America's Sweetheart, and certainly Agassi and Sampras being the two faces of Nike in the 90s, along with sort of lesser players but Michael Chang and Jim Courier. But there hasn't been the kind of cataclysmic star, even considering Federer and Nadal, that Serena has played in the waters she's played in, with, dating Drake and showing up at the Met Gala and being in movies, that anybody has really, before or after, or not yet anyway, really played in. And so understanding that part of that celebrity was thrust upon her, but part of it was very, very much central to her personality, to her desires, was a really interesting way to see her. And I'm really grateful that Jerry kind of framed it in that way, because I think it was really insightful. And I'm just curious to hear, your thoughts, Patrick, Jerry, maybe just to put it back to you. How did you come up with that framing, and at what point did you arrive at that as sort of the central narrative of how to understand Serena, and how satisfied are you that you kind of nailed it? Because I think you did, but
Yeah, I mean, I think, the kind of celebrity Serena became doesn't happen without agency. She has to want that, right? I mean, Venus is not that person. Now, Venus didn't win as many Grand Slams and all that other stuff, but Venus came first, and she's just a different personality. And this is true of actors and musicians and different kinds of people. Want different levels of attention. And I think, I speculate a little bit in the book, that, she was the center of attention in her family. She was the youngest of the sisters. She was, she was saying as a kid, if I'm not going to be a tennis player, I want to be an actress. That's just a different kind of personality. I also think that, she shaped her moment and was shaped by her moment, in the sense that, she, especially in the second half of her career, was, operating in an environment where Black women in America were finding their voice in a way that they never had been allowed to have that kind of voice before. And whether this was, through novels, or writing plays, or being engaged in politics, or you name it. She became part of that moment in a way, and it's not in a connect the dots way, but it is a kind of cultural context for her. Really, it's just such a larger engagement with the world beyond tennis over the last 10 years.
She also comes out of the, I guess you might call it the Michael Jordan school of, work from the inside with the boardroom. The brand is the key thing. Don't really ruffle feathers. Derek Jeter, very much followed that pattern. And she comes out of that And now she finds herself in a completely different thing where there's so much money. Athletes don't, I mean, the Players Club is a great example. They don't actually need anybody, between social media. And then, the way activism has just changed in the last, let's just say since Ferguson till now. I mean, Naomi Osaka walking out with those masks is something I don't imagine Serena would have even dreamed of doing 15 years ago.
Or today.
Or
today. I mean,
we should get to that, but I'm just curious to hear Briana's thoughts while we're on this subject, because I think the Naomi stuff and the current political climate, because I think you also do a really good job of those of us who have grappled with Serena in all of her complexity, which is she can be simultaneously an amazingly admirable person, leader, symbol, meaning a lot to a lot of different people. The champion, being the greatest of all time in terms of Grand Slam count, regardless of what anyone says, is, in and of itself unimpeachable. But I do think, before we get into sort of the complicated inheritance that she's now grappling with, I do want to hear, just Briana to talk sort of briefly about, what do you think about my framing of Jerry's book in terms of I like that you went into the analysis, but how does that seem right to you, that he really grapples with her as celebrity? Did you read that the same way I did? Or I'm just curious, the sort of central tenet of the book.
Yes, I would agree that what you said about Jerry left a good amount of space where he would present information or present the facts and kind of give you the space to think about how that experience or that environment is affecting Serena. On the subject of her celebrity and her activism, it is a role that she has grown into over time. She's always been outspoken for causes for womanhood and equality, but her activism has changed over the ways and how she's kind of being more, more upfront about what she's doing to kind of give publicity to these causes. I would say before 2015, Serena's activism was undercover. If you weren't a super fan, you may not have known that she was building schools in Africa for little girls, or that she was donating to all these causes. Or I think Jerry had a great anecdote about how she was talking to the guy from the Equal Justice Institute. I believe that's the name of the organization, and how that kind of came into play when she was coming back to Indian Wells after the racist incident so many years in the past. So I thought you did a great job, Caitlin, in explaining how Jerry wrote the book, because I think that everything about Serena is very complicated. And reading the book, I felt like there's just so many layers. She's like an onion. She's the greatest of all time onion that you just keep peeling and finding more layers to talk about with her.
And now I want Patrick to finish his thought, because I think in my read, Serena, for better or for worse, has gotten a little bit, I don't want to say lapped by Naomi Osaka, but there's, as any pioneer does, as somebody who means a lot to a lot of people, and, just keeping it within the context of Black women, you can say Althea got the ball so far, and then Lori McNeil and Zita Garrison, and, so on and so forth. And then it's picked up by Venus and Serena. And, not to make that a monolith in any way, but I do think the kind of activism that Naomi Osaka exhibits was made possible by Serena, but it's also a different flavor. And I do think there is some kind of, generational shift in terms of, part of which is just the fact that younger kids, I go on Instagram and younger coworkers of mine are like, we're all socialists now, defund the police, which is great. Happen to be things I believe in, but part of it is a generational thing, where how much do you think is possible? How much do you dare to dream? In my
well, it's also, I mean, I always place it in as a 50-year-old, right in the middle of Gen X. I always place a lot of these things in the gay movement. I thought Gen X really helped get it moving for equality very slowly, but I think we did our part as compared to other. And and now it's like, no, fuck you, we're speeding this shit up. It doesn't, the younger generations don't care, and that's a great thing. And I don't know that Serena or Venus or a lot of athletes of that time would have, the thing was, we're here, I go back to Jordan. His thing was, I'm going to make a financial, not just for himself, but he raised money for all kinds of things. He's like, I'm going to be, the first huge black advertising star. There were different ways of going about it, but I don't think that social push really existed when she was coming up in terms of like very publicly, and now she's in the middle of it. And it is interesting that Osaka is in many ways able to do things that Serena never would have been able to do.
And I think that, giving Serena her due there, like it's about progression and partly about generation. I also do think, and Jerry, part of the reason, as Briana said, Serena is a little bit complicated for those of us who've watched her very, very closely for the past 20 years. Venus did it, and they're different people, but Venus did it. Venus was writing op-eds, fighting for equal pay the night before she went out, in London, the night before she went out and testifying in front of the All England Lawn and Tennis Club for equal pay between genders. And then 12 hours later went out and won one of the greatest Grand Slam finals probably of all time, men or women, against Lindsay Davenport, the next day. Venus also wasn't as accomplished as Serena. And so, it's really tough to compare sisters, because I also understand as siblings, like there's a lot more there than just two other people and contemporaries. But like, part of Serena's complexity is she hasn't really been an activist. And, to Brianna's point, a lot of it was not public, and, we're now sort of understanding a little bit more of that. But Venus she was public. She did put her money where her mouth is and stood up for those things, maybe at the cost of her own career a little bit. And so I do think, as much as we want to sit around and say like, oh, Serena's like, iconic and there's so much about her that's great, there also are some things that, she's being, as Jerry said, it maybe wouldn't have occurred to her to go out in masks, because that's not, she also doesn't vote. Like,
yeah, well, I think
there's some stuff there that is a little bit more complicated, right?
Well, I think part of it has got to be being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. You are not supposed to vote.
So.
You are not supposed to participate in any way in that sort of public realm. The way I break it down is, if you if politics to you is that great, the personal is political, which was the second wave feminist mantra of my college years, Serena's political. I mean, it's just, she has broken barriers. She has, her mere being, her simple being has engendered a whole conversation about body image and body positivity and things like that. She's political. But if your idea of politics is engaging with your government in ways to reform policies and change laws, and if voting isn't enough, then you protest, and that she doesn't do. And that, as I said, part of that I think is Jehovah's Witness thing. Her faith. The other part of it is, until Nike decided it was getting behind Kirkpatrick. That changed the landscape as much as George Floyd's murder changed the landscape in terms of what an athlete was going to be able to do in terms of politics. I mean, if you were Michael Jordan or you were Serena coming up, like the idea that a black athlete was felt like they were walking the tightrope with their sponsors, even when they were the greatest. So this is, it's just a different moment. I mean,
from her celebrity side,
where it goes.
From her celebrity side, I think the closest parallel in terms of sports is probably Tiger Woods.
Correct.
I mean, you have Venus, so it's a much more interesting story because you have Venus, but if Venus was not part of the picture and it was the same tennis scenario, I think the parallel is Tiger. They on the course of becoming the global celebrity, bigger than the sport, and also the best to ever do it. I always find those two's careers very similar in that sense.
So the difference I would say is, I encountered so many women, black women, white women, young women, old women, who were not tennis, were not interested in tennis. They were interested in her. They would go to a tennis match because she was playing. They didn't know who she was playing. They didn't know, they didn't know the WTA rankings. They didn't know anything.
Yeah, you have
about
the great
tennis.
scene of the women watching on the big, who come to just watch on the big screen because
Yeah,
it's
they
her.
don't even go into Arthur Ashe Stadium. They're watching right in front of that fountain. There's so many moments like that you capture that I agree, and I think with the lens of Racquet, one of the things that we really try to be mindful of is like access isn't always good. And in today's day and age, even if you get somebody candid, they're still so media trained and corporatized that like they're not going to give you something as good as talking to two women who drove overnight to go sit at the fountain and don't even want to go into the stadium because they can just watch her on the big screen and be with each other. And so I think the book has so many of these moments in addition to a lot of insight and, like I said, really, really interesting framing of Serena for me. And I just want to bring up something because, I'm curious about your thoughts, Briana, especially as you grapple with like, I don't want to put so much onto your Twitter handle for the tennis and the hashtag you created, Black People Saving US Tennis, but I am cognizant as a white person of sometimes overtly praising Venus for her activism and it being read as like Venus being sort of like part of acceptability politics and like leaving Serena out because she's more complicated. And I don't know that I do that. Maybe I do, but I am curious like what your read on that is, like just the differences and the different ways to understand the sisters, because it's so hard not to compare them to each other, right? Or at least it is for me. And maybe that's just my baggage, but I do wonder what your thoughts about that might be.
Right. I feel like as they get older, it's easier to separate them.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be so symbiotic when they first came on tour, but as they get older, their personalities keep diverging. But it's just, I always find it interesting that so many people think that Venus is the more overtly political one, because I would say since Ferguson and all that, in our new time period, Venus hasn't really spoken up on any of those sorts of causes or anything, where Serena has been more, I wouldn't say more overt, but, she at least seems like she's aware of what's going on within her Jehovah Witness limitations. But
That's such a kind word.
That's a good way.
So I think there is a little bit of that respectability politics. That's something that kind of comes into it when people generally kind of talk about Venus and Serena, because to a lot of Black people, when white people would talk about tennis, they would always be like, oh, I love that Venus, but Serena, she's a little something. So
and that's why I bring it up, because I think, we've done a lot in our pages about Venus because there's such strong moments like the All England advocacy that I spoke about, and her funding more recently, some gender stuff. And Serena's, a more complicated person. She's also a more successful tennis player and a bigger star. And so we have a lot more baggage and a lot more sort of, she's also still going, like she's still viable. As much as Jerry's book can be viewed as Serena's attempt to come back and win this very arbitrary and, to be very clear, not legitimate record that some people want to say Margaret Court holds. She doesn't. But
I think though that the most fascinating thing going is Venus continuing to play. That's not a conversation for now. I really want to know what I find that fascinating that she keeps showing up to bow out in the second round and seems to be enjoying it. Yeah, of course. But I had a question for you, Briana, and I will not ask your age. That, of course, rude. But did you have tennis fandom? Are you before Serena? So we can kind of gauge how old you are on that. And when you got into it, was it primarily a white sport? And if so, did you become a fan because you like the game? I'm just curious about, because there's a lot in here about representation. And one question Jerry asks, sort of one he knows he can't answer. I'm not put words in your mouth, Jerry, but I think it's clear. Who does she represent? And I'm wondering if you had fandom before her, if she drew you in, or what your fan of tennis life has been like in that frame.
So I was introduced to tennis in high school. I had never watched it before until a friend kind of got me into it, because she used to play as a junior. So I kind of knew of Venus and Serena before tennis, but that was it. That was my general knowledge. I didn't know anything about the score, anything like that. So once I kind of started watching, I started during the 2007 Australian Open, which was a very great slam to get into if you wanted to watch Serena, because it was just so interesting to see her coming back. At this point before the slam, she was, I think, about 83 in the world, and she was kind of out for the count and came back and won in an amazing final against Sharapova. So that's kind of what sparked my interest and made me start watching. But I'm also a Rafael Nadal fan.
You are.
And so
I don't think anybody's as big a Rafael Nadal fan as you are. When you retired,
no, I am quite mild, okay, but I am a huge Nadal fan. Yeah. And he's actually what made me fall in love with the sport. Venus and Serena kind of kept me there for the entertainment part, but the intricacies of the game came from watching Rafa. So yeah, tennis was pretty white when I started watching.
Guess what?
But yeah, it still is. So it's not anything really new. I guess there's more color now. When I started the hashtag Black People Saving US Tennis, it started because
that makes me laugh every time I see it.
It's a lot of fun to say. I chuckle when I post it. You know, I'm always wondering what people are thinking, because I feel like it's going to get such like a charged reaction.
Donald Young's time will come.
Yes, D Young the GOAT. But I started that because all these young African-American players were coming up, like Sloane Stephens, Madison Keys. Donald Young was still kind of doing a little something then. We have Michael Moe, Francis Tiafoe coming up. And it just seemed like the USTA or the media wasn't really paying much attention to them. And they weren't having like huge results. You know, of course, Serena was the biggest star, but it seemed like they were bubbling under the surface, and they should get as much recognition as maybe your Sam Querrey's or Vince Spadia was around when I
Jack
first started.
Sock, just legends of the
Yeah,
game.
Jack Sock, that's another one. So I started that hashtag, and then, you know, things started really popping off. I was devastated when Serena lost the US Open match to Vinci. Like, that was probably the worst moment in tennis that I've ever watched. I had to pull over on the side of the road.
Oh, really?
That was tough.
Yeah, I was driving and listening on US Open radio, and I had to pull over because it was just that devastating. That would have been an amazing achievement, I think, because just to get back to the point, like, Serena is not just Serena. Her achievements affect what boys and girls in the African-American community think they can achieve, and even outside of the African-American community. So when she fails, it's hurtful, but every time she keeps coming back, it's always inspiring.
When that match happened, my daughter, I guess she was 6, and she was devastated. She ran in her bedroom and slammed the door and started crying. And I was like, "Welcome to sports fandom, kid."
You're
Wow.
a fan, right?
Oh.
I feel like that's
Glory.
just,
Well, I mean, she's a Mets fan. What am I gonna do? You know,
Oh,
I was in the
poor
stadium.
thing.
I will tell you, up until the last point, I thought Serena's got something up her sleeve. She's, you know, because you're used to saying that. So kind of to that vein, like, Jerry, you're a pro. If it hasn't already been said, just for posterity of this recording, I want to say you have been writing for the New Yorker. You've written now 2 books at least about tennis, and you know, you invented Play, the New York Times sports magazine. You were the longtime editor of the New York Times Magazine. Your career is really sort of unimpeachably great. And I ask this because I know you were going to make a book out of this and be a pro about it anyway, and you have. But were you, when you set out to cover this 2019 season, expecting her to win 24? Did you think it would happen, and was it a shock when it didn't? I mean, you not only as a journalist, but putting on your just like spectator hat, did you think, oh, of course she's going to get it this year?
Yeah, well, yes, is the short answer. I thought she'd find a way to win one. She had reached 2 finals in 2018, when honestly, she wasn't, as her own coach said, wasn't really in the greatest shape, right? She found a way to win because that's what champions do. I really think it was the US Open final against Andreescu that was hers to win. Serena was playing lights out tennis. Bianca, who I adore, had struggled through the draw. She had some nagging injuries, as the poor woman always seems to do. And, you know, if you remember that, she opened that match. Serena began by serving, opened the match with a slider ace, and then proceeded to double fault 3 times in the first game. It was like, oh, you know, so, you know, she defeated herself, which by and large, I mean, Renee Stubbs basically said this to me in the book, right? If you're going to beat Serena, you have to catch her on a day when she's like her emotions are unsettled.
Yeah.
And I think in that match, she wanted it too badly. I don't think it has anything to do with, well, Serena has said a number of things. I don't care if I win another one. I don't care about tying Margaret Court's record. I do care about tying Margaret Court's record. I want to win one as a mom. I think it's the last. I think it's the latter. I think she really, you know, she loves Disney movies. And I think she wants the Disney ending where she's holding her daughter in one arm and holding the trophy in the other arm. And then she calls it a day. And I think that's what she's after.
I mean, I think your read is right. Like, just off the top of my head, I probably should have researched this, but she comes back and she has now made 3 semifinals, 4?
4.
So Kerber, she got outplayed.
Yeah.
Just outplayed. Kerber was lights out. Serena wasn't ever in that match. Naomi, 2018 US Open, same thing. She has not taken a set off Naomi Osaka in the
100%. And Naomi was locked and loaded in that.
That was the worst part about the whole controversy. It was like it was going to be over in 2 minutes anyway.
The match was done and dusted no matter what. Naomi Osaka crushed her at Miami 4 months earlier, and this was a continuation of that dynamic. Simona Halep, I remember talking to Andrea Pekovic, who's one of our contributors, who had played Simona Halep at that Wimbledon the first round, or was practicing next to her or something. And she was like, Simona Halep is going to win this tournament. She looks so good. And on grass, you don't think
really good. And she was moving on grass like it was clay.
Yeah, on grass, you don't think Halep is the favorite. But I remember her saying everybody was talking about that buzz. Like, so really 3 of those finals were kind of out of Serena's racket, which if you're a longtime Serena fan, you're not used to seeing any match out of Serena's racket, you know, on the racket of her opponents. But coming back, injuries, motherhood, time, age, all that stuff. The Bianca Andreescu match, though, Jerry, you're right to point that out. That was the match I think that got away. That was the slam final that could have been hers to have. And not to slight Bianca Andreescu at all, because she had a
100%.
phenomenal year that year, too. She won Toronto. She won.
She was unbelievable.
You know,
she won Indian Wells.
You know, and looked like an amazing player. But I do think from Serena gave that match away. And
I think part of it, though, is that even the one that she lost, I was at the semi when she beat one of the many Eastern Europeans, so I cannot keep straight before.
Pliskova, right?
Right before she lost to Naomi, but she just, you know, wiped her off the court. And I think that's the thing. It's harder. It's like when she owns the semis and then looks bad in the finals, it just doesn't compute. Yeah. Even though
it's amazing, particularly against Pliskova, because I remember Renee was coaching Pliskova at that time, so I was in Pliskova's box. And I think Pliskova might have been ranked number 1 in the world at that time and going into that semi. And she just dismantled it. I mean, it was like 2-2, like not even, no contest. Right. And then she shows up and you have to think, to Jerry's point, you know, is it the record? Is it not wanting it? Is it wanting it too much? Is it the emotion stuff? Or is it as a mom? You know, I think regardless of how you feel about Serena, and most of us in tennis feel, I think mostly admiration, but, you know, some complexity because she's a complex woman. But we're all rooting for her. Like I can't not root for her to get 24. Yeah. Not only because Margaret Court is an apartheid-loving, gay-bashing, frankly, piece of shit, but also her record's not real. She played the Australian Open when like planes didn't go that far. Like it's a farce. It's not a real record. Serena already has it. It's 23. It used to be Groff's at 22. But I think we just all want it for symbolism. You know, the Disney ending.
Well, we want to stop talking about Margaret Court, and we will.
Right.
Wins one. That's what I just want to stop talking about Margaret Court.
Yeah.
Was Serena aware you were writing a book? Did she know that you were kind of around?
You know, I wrote a dutiful email to her agent, said I was doing this, and actually chatted with her a little bit at the Australian Open, but it was, you know, she didn't care, and she wasn't interested, and I wasn't asking for anything. I just thought like, oh, you might want to be aware of this. But, you know, I think, you know, to a lot of what we've been talking about here is that, you know, the journalist as, you know, somehow a crucial mediator between the player and the audience is finished. I mean, on that sort of level, I mean, it's just, you know, the world of Roger Angell and George Plimpton is just gone, where you had these leisurely summers with your subject, you know, dining and hanging out, and, you know, and I will say that I think the more the press room starts to look younger and more diverse, and there are more women and there are more people of color who are covering sports, I think that would maybe open a door a little bit, but not much. I mean, between, you know, social media and
also the thing, you know, like the Players Tribune has had more good things than I thought it would have, but it's still, you're also at the bottom level, there's always some brand interest, right? Her documentary was very revealing in some ways, and especially the story about the, you know, the problems with her birth. But it's also it's not in the hands of a, you know, noted documentarian, young, old, indifferent.
Yes.
Even you can get, you know, maybe she would let Ava DuVernay make a real documentary about her. So, and I don't think that's going to change, and that's not specific to Serena, but just the way, I think there's going to be more projects like yours where like you come at it from the side and like, this is where we're looking at different things, because you're just not going to have, it's not just access, it's also they're in control, and as it should be.
I'm here to say I think that's actually a good thing. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And that's not to say that, you know, getting the subject to be able to communicate their own thoughts, whether it's through their own social media channels, which they're already doing in that toothpaste is not going back in the tube, or working with a journalist to tell a story. But I do think, like, you know, let's not forget, and I mean this with no malice whatsoever, but like most athletes, certainly not excluding tennis players, are not particularly self-aware in a way that makes them interesting subjects. Like what made Open so amazing, and most of it was the fact that Andre Agassi had a fantastic ghostwriter, but what made it so amazing is he was sort of simultaneously aware of what it took for him to be an exceptional athlete, and also able to be that athlete. And I don't even know that he would have done it in real time. Like most of these athletes don't go to college, they don't go to high school a lot of times, and that's not to say they're not worldly and intelligent, but they're not necessarily educated in a way that or even incentivized to understand what they are doing, which makes sitting down with somebody who's a journalist able to extract it from them. Like Tracy Austin's memoir illustrates this. Like she can't think of anything that she's doing as anything out of the ordinary, because it means that she'll be nervous and self-aware and not able to hit that backhand on match point, right? And so I don't necessarily think it's a good or bad thing. I think it's probably just, it's up to the media and journalists and storytellers to do a better job. And that's certainly to say it should be more diverse. It's certainly to say it should be younger and more certainly embracing of, you know, gender equality and parity. But I do think, like, you don't need the athlete to talk to you to write something really, really insightful, because oftentimes, even if you get them, they're not going to say it. And I love the fact that this book is a write around, because I think it had Serena spoken like we did with Maria Sharapova in our third issue when she was coming back from Meldonium. If you get them, then you have to quote them, and they're not necessarily going to say anything that's worthwhile. Serena's more interesting to me as a figure being observed, and like Bree was saying, in terms of some of the stuff that she is coming out and saying and being about now, as opposed to her being able to articulate it. I think it takes pressure off of them in a way that allows for really good storytellers to fill in the gaps. And so that's what I love so much about this book, and why, you know, I'm not super sentimental about the time that, you know, Roger Angell gets to spend a summer with subject. You know, that's
no. And also, you know, that was Frank Sinatra Has a Cold. That was the whole gist of it. Like, that's no, we're not talking to Frank. Let's talk to his bodyguard. Briana, as somebody who probably did not grow up reading white male profiles of female athletes, white and of color in Sports Illustrated and 1990 creepy Frank DeFord profiles. I'm curious what where do you get where have you gotten most of your tennis media from since you picked up the game in 07? Is there spots that you go to for profiles, or do you care about reading profiles? Is that I'm just wondering, as somebody who didn't grow up waiting for a weekly magazine like I did to read anything about sports.
Right. Well, it's definitely changed over time. When I first got into the sport around 07, ESPN Tennis was still active. So there were a lot of articles. That was really the go-to spot to check scores. I remember checking the 08 Wimbledon final on refresh, just hitting the ESPN Tennis page. But since that kind of has like disevolved, like really Twitter has taken over. It's kind of like the hub if you're kind of super obsessive about the sport. I consider tennis the greatest sport for people who get really obsessed about things, because there's always a rabbit hole you can go down every day. There's something new.
So well put.
So Twitter is where it's at. I've come across articles mostly by following the different journalists. I actually knew of Jerry from following him before even reading his book. And that's really how you kind of have to do it now. Unfortunately, it's so spread out and kind of convoluted. You just kind of have to follow the writers you kind of prefer. There are some Twitters where the journalists have kind of banded together. There's one called Tennis Majors that you can kind of check out to see different articles. But really, if you're obsessed about tennis or want to learn more, I'd say go check out Racquet Magazine, or just get on Twitter and follow some people and go crazy. You might see some things you might not want to see, but it'll work out in the end.
There's a number of actual, and Jerry, you could talk to this probably, there's a number of tennis books that came out this year. Maybe it's just I'm paying more attention since we started this show, last April or whatever. But I'm surprised at how many titles there are, given that tennis history doesn't ever have seemed to have the same level of interest of other sports past histories, or maybe it's just not as big. Certainly baseball, basketball, etc. Boxing, people constantly talking about the past. But I'm curious if you've noticed that tennis history seems to be having somewhat of a resurgence, or just more interest, or is it just the mass?
I don't know. The publishing shorthand was always the smaller the ball, the bigger the advance. So that golf books were, thought of as, people would buy them. The reading public. And when I was at the Times, and when we first started getting, metrics, online metrics back in, 2011 or something, the most read sports stuff in the Times was the Olympics and the U.S. Open, because these are things that educated sports fans, and men and women. So you got two audiences. But I don't know. My sons are just all about the NBA. They really they don't have any. They'll go to a tennis match with me, but they just think the NBA is where America's at, from their urban perspective. So it's hard. I don't know. I really don't know.
I would like to say that for such a niche sport, tennis does have a great amount of documentaries or just movie features. I know Serena has at least 4 or 5 alone to herself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And do you, I'm curious, as we started about, we got like 10 more minutes to make the hour. Briana and Caitlin, both of you, was there anything in Jerry's book that surprised you about Serena, or something you had not thought of before? Most of it was new to me. I sort of, I knew her backstory, but not a lot of the stuff in here. But you two are way deeper into it. So I'm curious what surprised you or intrigued you, or, you saw anew.
I'll go first. Well, I guess I would say the one thing I was surprised about reading was how young Serena was during the incident at Indian Wells. and how early on in her career that was, because coming to tennis in 2007, she had been boycotting the tournament for years at that point. So it just kind of seemed like something that happened after she had become successful. But when reading Jerry's book, it was like surprising to me almost that she went through such a defining moment before she had even become number one in the world. So that was something that really struck with me, just about how young Serena was, about with some incidents that happened throughout her career and how she's handled them, not always with the best grace, but if you think about where she was in her life, she didn't do that terrible of a job dealing with everything.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, Venus and Serena are about my age. Serena is a little younger than I am, but Venus and I were born in the same year. I think she just turned 41, or she's about to. She's a June birthday. And growing up with them, the legend and the lore of, not only their sort of on-court accomplishments, but their family and Oracene and Richard and the sisters, was always sort of part of my understanding of them. And I still was sort of really taken aback by some of the reporting about Richard. And as Jerry said earlier tonight, like some of the sort of treatment of Serena as the baby, like them, Venus opening her covers when Serena wasn't feeling secure, and inviting Serena to come and share a bed with her just because she wasn't, sort of basically a lot of the stuff that about them as being bonded as closely as they were, because when they sort of came onto my consciousness, it was in the context of, again, and persisting to this day, like a pretty misogynist, like definitely white centric, media conversation. But I think especially in 1998, 1999, when Serena won her first Grand Slam at the US Open, it was very, very much about, how outrageous Richard Williams was, and how there was a lot of doubt about the sort of veracity of competition between them. There was still this rumor, as that Indian Wells incident really exposed, about Richard rigging the matches between the two of them. And so it was really hard for me to sort of see Serena as her own person, because in my consciousness, they came up together and I was sort of watching the two of them as contemporaries. And the truth is, folks who are a little younger than me and people who I think came to the game a little bit later than I did, because I started playing when I was 3 and I played college tennis, basically I've been into tennis since 1983, have a different understanding of Serena. And this book really recast her as somebody separate from her sister. And it was so hard for me to separate them in my mind, which is why I asked Brie that question about, respectability politics and the idea of constantly keeping them sort of hemmed together. Because the truth is they couldn't be more different. And I will share something that's not in Jerry's book, but that my personal hero, may be controversial to some, journalist, broadcast commentator, Mary Carrillo, shared with me about the two of them. And it really made me warm to Serena more than I already had, I think, which was Mary was telling me that she was at the airport and ran into both Venus and Serena in the moments after Roger Federer had lost to Nadal in that 2008 Wimbledon final and cried on Rafa's shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Carrillo was the one who told Venus about the result and the one who told Serena, I guess, like waiting at baggage claim. And their two answers couldn't have been more different, but so instructive as to who they are as people. She said to Venus, this is what happened. And Venus shrugged her shoulders and said, somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. Later, minutes later, she sees Serena and says the same thing about, Rafa and Roger. And Serena goes, that was so selfish of Roger to take away Rafa's moment. And I thought, what an interestingly empathetic and sort of human response, in a way that also kind of shows, to Jerry's point about, if you catch her on a day when she's in her feelings, nowadays that's a real disadvantage for her, but also makes her so much more interesting as a person. And so I liked so much hearing about how Serena was just a different creature within their family structure as the baby, because it really helped me take away some of the celebrity and some of the stuff that I kind of have a hard time with her in a way that it made her much more human. And for me, that was such a useful way to approach and account for, I think, a lot of the stuff that makes her a complicated, but ultimately like very, very human person.
And Briana got bonus Nadal coverage.
Exactly right.
Always here for the Nadal coverage.
One of the things that Torre really wrote a very lovely review of the book for the New York Times Book Review, which is online, but it comes out in print in a couple of weeks, I guess. But one of the things he picked up on, which I was very conscious of when I was writing, is the amount of and depth of love in that family is kind of profound. And people talk about it all the time. I mean, I didn't quote anybody else talking about it because it just felt awkward. But you can see them together physically and understand that Venus was simply the most important person in many ways in Serena's life, and yet she had to vanquish her to become who she became. I mean, this is Greek tragedy stuff, and the whole way Venus has handled that. Serena still says Venus takes care of me, and you can see it in their body language that's true. Serena's talking and talking, and Venus is rolling her eyes and just putting her arm around her and whatever. And yet, Venus would have been the greatest tennis player the world had ever seen, except for her baby sister, which is just really, I don't know. It gets to me in some way, and it's an essential mystery about them, how they have navigated that.
Yeah,
it's beautiful, and it's also, I don't think the story can be told enough that their dad saw tennis on television and said, I'm going to make some world champion. I mean, at least Tiger Woods' dad played golf, at least. I just think it's one of the great American stories ever. I want to do one last thing real quick. In 25 years from now, when you're telling what you remember on court, the thing most about Serena, and for me, it's easy. It's the "come on" scream, because I just love that phrase. Whenever "come on," I just I think that's fantastic. But each of you, what will you remember the most? You think, either specific moment or Serena style that you've witnessed over these years?
Yeah.
Well, I think the most memorable moment, like if you want to remember Serena, is the 2012 Olympics gold medal match. But I think the one signature thing that I'll remember about Serena is those ace and walks. Ace down the tee and the walk.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Oh, mine, because the walking up to the line in trouble, basically like the equivalent of like unhinging her jaw and just like eating somebody's chances alive and like their soul along with it, which is why that Roberta Vinci, up until she lost match point, I was still waiting for her to like walk up to the line and hit an ace up the tee, and just not stop until she had walked away with the final berth. So I think, Serena's indefatigable like ability to dig deep and serve an ace up the tee is I'm gonna steal Breathe because I think it's mine as well. What about you, Jerry?
It's the serve. It's the image on the cover, really. She just has the most perfect. If you were sculpting, if a coach were sculpting what your serve should look like, it would look like Serena Williams' serve. Everything about it, the toss, the trophy pose, the racket drop, the whole bit. She's just got it, and it's just, when I see her in my mind's eye, that's what I see her doing.
All right, we have to wrap up here real quickly, though, since we have a few new people here. And if you catch it online, we have 2 Squawkin Sports coming up. The next one will be this Monday, June 28th. The book is called All the Colors Came Out. It is both our Pride Month and Father's Day special. It's by Kate Fagan, who from ESPN. And it's a father, a daughter, and a life of lessons. Basically, it's a story of her father getting ALS and her kind of putting her career on hold and going back home and bonding over the Knicks after they'd had some differences over her coming out and marrying a woman and all sorts of family drama. It's very lovely, and I think you'll like it. And July 15th, speaking of tennis, L. John Wortham has a new book. It's called Glory Days. It is about the summer of 1984, the Olympics. It's got some Bruce Springsteen, it's got some Prince, and it has a chapter called Johnny Mac and Martina for the tennis crowd. And once again, I want to thank Rackets. You should get a subscription. It's very good, and occasionally I'm in it. Jerry's in it a lot.
Briana's
actually-
about to be in it.
And,
Please, please,
Yes.
please.
Return my emails. Come on, man.
Cross our
And-
fingers.
once again, thank you to Caitlin and Briana and Jerry. And there's the book. It's really cool. If you
Lovely
have
buzz.
any interest in Serena, you will
It's-
definitely
Fantastic.
you will definitely dig it.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Nice meeting you, Briana. Nice meeting you.
Yes.
And
Please
I don't know.
buy the book from an indie. It doesn't have to be Greenlight, but we are big supporters of indie bookstores on Squawkin Sports and indie media, like, say Racquet. And enjoy Wimbledon 24.
Yes.
Let's get it. Let's get it. No more mentioning the woman who
24,
won't be
come on.
mentioned.
One and done.
Yes.
Make it 25 in
24.
New York. 25 in New York. Walk off into the sunset.
let's go. Let's go. All right. Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Take care.
Yes.
Bye.